Not so long ago, the South African government told us about some support they are giving entrepreneurs with a 200 billion rand package that was supposed to be some kind of a venture between the South African Reserve Bank and National Treasury, providing some guarantee to the banks to be able to give you and I some financial support during COVID-19. Now, from all reports that we've been seeing in the media, things have not gone as well as planned. And one of the people that have been keeping tabs on this particular issue is the co-founder and chairman of Intellidex, my good man, Stuart Theobald, who now joins me on the line to talk a little bit more about this. Stuart, you guys have done some work on this particular one. What have you found?
The plan, as it was initially laid out, was to mobilize 200 billion rand of lending into the economy, focusing on businesses that need liquidity support to get through the lockdown and to be able to deal with the broader economic fallout of this crisis. As it's unfolded, the volumes have not done anywhere near 200 billion. We've seen, depending on how you measure it, somewhere between 2 and 7 billion rand of lending going into the economy. And that's a disappointing outcome for what we need. The 200 billion going into the economy is important. It drives growth, or at least protects us from a bigger decline than we would have otherwise. Now, things don't always work out as planned, and we've seen in similar kinds of schemes, which have been done in over 50 countries around the world, that the key is to be responsive to experience, that as it unfolds and as we see how it's working, you've got to make changes to get the desired results that you want. So I think the important thing at the moment is for government and the banks to work together to implement the kind of changes that would be important to get the results that we want.
What's interesting to me from at least what I have seen is there seems to be a lot of challenges here, but all of them center around kind of the intention of the scheme and the requirements that they've now kind of put in place. So let me start with you before I go into my list. What are the biggest impediments to the progress that you have seen? What are the biggest issues?
So look, we can see it in two different sides of the story. You've got the demand side, which is the entrepreneurs and business owners who want to borrow, and then you've got the supply side, which is the banks who want to lend. And there are problems with the scheme on both sides. So if we start with the business owners, there are a number of disincentives to accessing the scheme. Look, this is a crisis moment. There's a great deal of uncertainty. So any business is going to want to be risk averse at the moment. And if you're risk averse, the last thing you want to do is to get into more debt that you have no idea whether you'll be able to afford. So there's a natural resistance to going into debt when you might have other alternatives. And the other alternatives are not great for the economy because they often involve letting people go or shutting down your business.
Or not paying a landlord.
Yeah, exactly. And you can understand why entrepreneurs would feel that that's a better, lower risk option for them. Then the other problems with the attractiveness to borrowers is that there are certain elements. Banks have required people to put up personal surety, for instance, against the loans. Now, we're all uncertain about the future, and there are not many people that are going to be willing to put their house at risk at the moment facing the outlook.
But wasn't the 200 billion supposed to be the security? I mean, I'm a little confused. I thought the government is saying, here's a government guarantee, banks, go out and lend these entrepreneurs. We stand behind that. Now I hear we also need personal sureties. Help me.
So this brings us on to the supply side. What are the issues around the banks that are preventing them from lending more? Now, when the scheme was structured, you're right, there's a 94% guarantee. That means that government picks up the tab, or 94% of the tab, if one of these loans goes wrong. The problem is that government said that banks have to apply their normal risk assessment criteria. So the normal process that they would go through in granting any normal loan has to be applied. And government has the right to audit any call on the guarantee that a bank might make. And if it turns out that the bank didn't apply their normal criteria, government has the right to refuse to pay the guarantee. So that's structurally a problem for banks because it really means that the guarantee is not helping them to shift their risk appetite. You would want them to feel that they're much more enabled to lend into the economy without putting their own balance sheet at risk. But that's not what we're seeing. And that's a major contributor to banks requiring security and other kinds of risk control measures that they would in normal lending.
So this thing, number one, the guarantee is not quite the guarantee I think it is for the reasons you've explained. Number two, I can only borrow the money to help me with, I think it was 3 months of costs. I mean, to your point, I certainly agree with you. As an entrepreneur, I'd rather find ways to avoid the cost than to go and borrow money to pay the cost, right? And so I'm going to talk to my staff, I'm going to talk to my landlord, I'm going to talk to whoever I got to pay. But the other issue that I've seen here is that, the restriction of what I'm borrowing the money for doesn't always help in terms of building the business going forward. I might want to use that money to pivot my business, right? I'm wearing the t-shirt here. I never give up. I pivot. So I may very well want to, maybe build an e-commerce platform or change my business in a particular way. This money doesn't help me do that. In fact, it kind of keeps me in the past.
Exactly. I think you're making a really important point here, that the use of proceeds is restricted specifically to paying overheads. So, rent, staff salaries, electrical bills, and so on. And none of the things that would be useful to enable businesses to cope with the crisis better. If a restaurant or a hair salon can't operate at the moment, they should be able to use the time to remodel, bring forward something they're planning to do in 6 months. And also to, as you say, pivot the business. If we're going to have social distancing for a long time to come, restaurants are going to have to redesign how things work. And they need money to invest in making those changes. And this could enable them to do this. So I think the restriction on what you can use the loans for is a major impediment to the demand on why people would want the loans. But really, I think doesn't help in what we're trying to achieve here, which is to stimulate economic activity. And this could be very productive economic activity.
Do they even bring entrepreneurs to these conversations, man? Like, do they even ask small business people what they actually need money for? Because I don't get it. I really don't get it. I honestly don't get it.
I guess you should be knocking on the door of the Reserve Bank and offering some advice.
Okay, fine. Enough of my complaining. Anyway, let's talk solutions before I let you go. Realistically, what do you think are the practical changes that can be made that can start unlocking some of this 200 billion?
So we've seen elsewhere in the world that clear changes that are made along the way of these schemes is to make it more attractive to business owners. So remove some of the requirements for personal surety, remove the restrictions on what you can spend the money on, remove some of the cash flow restrictions because this money is not available up front. It's spread over 3 months, which again is an unnecessary restriction. So the easier you make it for entrepreneurs to use the money, the more demand you're going to get on the demand side. Then there has to be fixes on the supply side, just how the 94% guarantee works. And I think their government needs to set down the kind of credit assessment it wants to see, which isn't the normal bank credit assessment, because we're wanting lending that's outside of the normal. We're facing an economic crisis, and in that circumstance, banks hunker down, right? They reduce their risk appetite. They get ready for hard times. And we're asking them to do the opposite. So we can't say to banks, this has to be business as usual. We've got to specify for them a credit assessment process that allows them to lend against the trend, to really drive lending into the economy at the same time as the economy is pushing back, pushing against banks' normal instincts.
But is that realistic, Stuart? I mean, how do you get banks to do that? To your point, in tough times, they hold back. I mean, the only thing I can see is giving them a real guarantee. Basically saying, these are the basics I want you to do, but here's the guarantee. Indeed, if Andile doesn't pay, I'll stand behind him.
Exactly. That's what we need to see. And that means government also needs to budget for losses, because they're going to be losses. As soon as you reduce the risk requirements, you're going to increase the number of bad debts. So government has to be prepared for that there are going to be bad debts. But you can say to banks, look, we only want you to look at how this business was performing over the last year up to February. That is the thing you must judge this business on, not since or not the future, or not even whether it's had to miss payments on some debt in March. A lot of businesses have struggled during the lockdown. And if we really want to save them, we can't hold against them the fact that they struggled. That's, so tweaking and prescribing what banks can look at when doing their risk assessment, that's the way to go forward.
Absolutely. Let's leave it there, Stuart. Thank you so much for your time, my brother. I appreciate it. And hopefully, all the decision makers around the table will start seeing the light and doing the right things on this one. Thank you so much, bro.
Pleasure.
All right. That was Stuart Theobald. He is from Intellidex. I have no idea what some of us were thinking when we set this up. To Stuart's point, We've got to come up with the solutions that actually work, which probably means having the very people you're trying to help around the table to help you understand what they're going through, so that you make sure that you put together a product that actually helps them, and not one that's launched and then has the false start that this one is having. But hopefully the powers that be are listening to some of the insights that people like Intellidex are sharing. Thank you very much again to Stuart for joining us. Thanks, brother.